We are on to Cycle 3. Cycle 3 covers pages 221 to 227. Please open up your books and follow along. Page 221. We're going to start at the first full sentence. She pulled Mama's picture out and held it as far away from her eyes as her arms would stretch. She looked at the picture, looked over her glasses at me, then looked right at Mr. Jimmy and said, "Any more questions for this young man?" She slid the picture over to him. Mr. Jimmy picked it up and said, "Well, I'll be. Remember that old con man who used to drag that ruined horse through town? Now, what was his name? Help me out here, Grace. Didn't he call his act Joey Pagus and his broke back bonking bucko?" Miss Thomas said, "It was Joey Pagus and his broke back bucking bronco, James." "What else do you see in this picture?" Mr. Jimmy said, that's definitely Angela Janet Calloway." He looked at me and said, "Are you sure this is your mother?" I said, "Yes, sir, but her name's Caldwell, not Calloway." He said, "Well, I'll just be." Miss Thomas butted in on him. "There's little doubt about that, James, but what we've got to do—" She kept on talking, but I quit listening 'cause something just came out of the blue and gave me a good whop right on the forehead. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I butted in on Miss Thomas and said, "That means that's not some little dead girl's room I'm sleeping in. That's my mama's room." She looked at me kinda surprised, like this was the first time she'd thought of that too. She said, "That's right, Bud. You're back in your mama's room." I said, "How come Hermione Calloway never called on me and my mother? All he'd had to do was call on us one time, and I know she wouldn't have been so sad." Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy took turns shooting quick looks at each other. Then she said, "Bud, give me your hand." Uh-oh. Pretty soon I'd have to come up with some rules and things about when Miss Thomas holds your hand. She stretched her arm across the table, and I held on to her fingers. "Bud," she said, "Mr. C, excuse me, your granddad, didn't know anything about you. No one knew where your mother had gone." Mr. Jimmy said, "That's right, son. She just up and run off one day. I mean, we all knew Herman was hard on her, but it wasn't like it was nothing personal. He was hard on everybody. I used to tell him all the time to slack off some on the girl, to go easy, but I can remember his exact words. He said, 'Easy go don't make the mare run. This is a hard world, especially for a Negro woman. There's 100 million folks out there of every shade and hue, both male and female, who are just dying to be harder on her than I could ever be. She's got to be ready.' Shoot, I could see that the girl wasn't the type to—" Miss Thomas said, "James, why don't you go up and check on Herman?" she said. "Why don't you—" But it wasn't a question. Mr. Jimmy said, "Oh, oh, maybe I should," and left the kitchen. Miss Thomas told me, "Bud, I know you can see your granddad has troubles getting along with most folks, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "I think it's because he expects so much out of everybody, himself included, and when you set your standards so high, you get let down a lot." I shook my head up and down, acting like I understood. She said, "Now take your mother, for instance. He was so proud of that young woman, and he loved her very, very much. He was determined that she was going to be the first Calloway to get schooling all the way through college, so he thought he had to be strict on her. But he went overboard, Bud, simple as that. He used to crow about how his mother and father had been born slaves and how now it was only 2 generations later and the Calloways had come so far and worked so hard that one of them was actually going to be a teacher. It was his dream, not hers. Not yet, anyway. And he never gave her time to pick it for herself. The more he pushed her, the more she fought him. Finally, it got to be too much and she left. We think she ran off with one of Herman's drummers. We've been hoping for 11 years that she'd send some word or come home. And she finally has. Looks to me like she sent us the best word we've had in years. Miss Thomas smiled at me, and I knew she was trying to say I was the word that my mama had sent to them. She said, "Wait here for 1 second, Precious. I've got to go to my room for something." Miss Thomas was probably saying that as an excuse so she could blow her nose and cry, but she came back in a flash. She was holding an iron picture frame and handed it to me. "This has been on my dressing table for 13 years, Bud, ever since your mother was 16 years old. Now it belongs to you." I wanted to say thank you, but I just stared at the picture in the heavy iron frame. It was Mama. The only the picture only showed her head all around the edges. It was smoky or foggy, so that it looked like Mama had poked her head out of a cloud. And Mama was smiling, the same soft smile she'd given me when she got home from work. It'd been so long since I'd seen Mama smile that I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Miss Thomas said, "Let me show you something, Bud." She took the frame out of my hands and said, "Watch this." She moved the picture up and down, right and left, then around in circles. "Do you see how her eyes are on you all the time? No matter which way you look at the picture, she's watching." It seemed like Mama was looking direct at me no matter where Miss Thomas put the picture. I can keep this? I feel like I've been holding on to it until the rightful owner came along, and it looks to me like he's finally shown up. What took you so long, child? Miss Thomas patted me underneath my chin. She said, "But Bud, we've got a problem I'm gonna need your help with." Uh-oh. She said, you said when you were 6 years old when your mother You said you were 6 years old when your mother died? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so that was 4 years ago. Yes, ma'am. You can remember how bad you felt when you first knew she was gone, can't you? Yes, ma'am. 'Cause it still feels the same. Well, you've had 4 years to try to heal that scar. But it still hurts some of the time, doesn't it? Sometimes a lot. I know, Bud. But remember, your grandfather and I just found out that she passed. The hurt is brand new for us. Miss Thomas started swallowing. And even though he hasn't seen her in 11 years, I know there isn't a day that goes by that he doesn't think about her. He'd never admit it, but there isn't one show that we give that he doesn't first look out into the audience, not to see how big the crowd is, but hoping that she'll be out there, hoping that she'd have seen a flyer tacked to a telephone pole somewhere and would have stopped by to see him. He loved her so much, Bud. Sorry, sweetheart. She took the hand she wasn't squeezing. Uh, she took the hand she wasn't squeezing my fingers with and took out a handkerchief and blew her nose. Those stones that he picks up everywhere he performs are for her. She must have been 4 or 5 years old. The band was getting ready to travel to Chicago for a week, and before we left, he asked her what she wanted him to bring back for her. He was thinking a doll or a dress or something, but she told him, "A walk, Daddy. Bring me a walk from Chicago." So everywhere we went after that, he'd have to get her a walk. He'd write the city and the day we were there on them for her. He's got boxes of them upstairs, 11 years worth. So, Bud, I don't know how Herman is going to be feeling after this. That's where I need your help. You've got to remember that both Herman and I love your mother just as much as you do. This didn't seem like it could be true, not just because it didn't seem like anyone could love my mother as much as I do, but because it didn't seem like Hermione Calloway could love anyone at all. Miss Thomas said, "So if you can remember, Bud, be patient with him. That ornery old man upstairs is very, very hurt right now, and I just can't say where he is going to land after this news gets through blowing him around." Miss Thomas was starting to do that stingy-eyed blinking. "So we're going to have to give him some time. We're going to have to let him find out how he feels before—" Mr. Jimmy came into the kitchen. "Grace," he said, "he wants you." Hermione Calloway was making everybody feel like they had the blues. It looked like Mr. Jimmy'd wiped some tears from his eyes, too. Miss Thomas came around to my side of the table and gave me a hug. She said, "You okay?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Should I go see how he's doing?" "Yes, ma'am." She left the kitchen and Mr. Jimmy went into the living room. I picked Mama's picture up and put it back in the envelope. We're going to pause right there, scholars, and go back to our quiz. Now, we have a couple questions to answer, and each question has an excerpt or a quote to read above it. This first one talks about an earlier moment in the story that we can now understand in a different way. So I'd like you to pause this video and read that now. Go. Now that you've read that excerpt, we can answer the next few questions. Why did Mama keep all of the Hermione Calloway flyers in her dressing table? Answer that question. Why might she have kept those flyers? Our next question is, why might the blue flyer have upset Mama most? So I want you to pause this video and answer that now. Did you answer both of those questions? All right, I'm going to offer a little insight. If you decide to go back and change your answer, go back and do that. Quick hints. Mama kept the Hermione Calloway flyers. Who was Hermione Calloway to Mama? Who is that? How is she related to him? Yeah, Hermione Calloway is her dad. So why might she have kept the flyers with her? And then why might the blue flyer have upset Mama most? Where were Hermione Calloway and the Dusky Devastators going to be playing? What town were they going to play in? What town do Mama and Bud live in? They're the same town. So why might it have upset her that he was going to be playing in that town? All right, pause this video if you need more time. Last question of this cycle. I would like you to go back and reread these 3 moments. Go. Now that you've read those 3 moments, how might the word strange suggest something different now than it did when we first read it? When something is strange, it's usually unfamiliar. Are these experiences unfamiliar to Bud? Give me yes or no and tell me why. When you're done, move on to the exit ticket.